Welcome to the Diversity Project's International Women's Day webinar on menopause in the workplace, the first we have done on this important and ever more topical subject. During this online event, we will cover the following aspects of shown on the slides, starting with an industry and diversity project member perspective, following on to a medical view to and removing some of the myths. You will hear personal stories from our panelists and find out what else we have in the pipeline, including a menopause pledge to practically help employers and employees. We welcome questions at any point, which you can ask via the chat and Q&A functions, which we will answer at the end. Did you know that 51% of our population will transition through the menopause, and everyone will be impacted by it, whether directly or indirectly? According to a report launched by Standard Chartered, thank you Caroline, and the FSSC last year, 128,000 women, or 1 in 10 employees working in the financial industry, are currently going through the menopause. This is a staggering number and a lot of hot flushes. The report, a link to which will be shown in the chat function, concluded that the menopause is still a taboo, and it is likened to the discussions around mental health about 10 years ago. The industry is losing talent because of menopause, and with the right support, women can stay and progress in our industry. We need to increase the awareness and menopause support to retain and progress key talent, as well as improving gender equality throughout the talent pipeline, especially at the most senior levels, which ties in to 2 of the Diversity Project's specific gender goals, which are to help reduce the gender pay gap by 1/3 from 2019 figures, and to increase female fund managers up to 20%, both by 2026. It is normally at these senior levels between the ages of 45 and 55 at which women are most likely to experience the menopause. But this is an average and it can start earlier, something I found out to my complete surprise and horror towards the end of last year. Thank you. Our workstream decided to survey the Diversity Project members, and about half responded. We thought it would be interesting for you to see what their current benchmark for menopause provision is. What it has showed us is that it is still early days for this topic for a lot of our members. Next slide, please, Caroline. Thank you. It has also helped show us what good could look like in terms of best practice and a menopause pledge, which we'll discuss later. Next slide, please. I personally found these results interesting in terms of other resources that firms have available to support those going through the menopause, and also that most as yet don't have a menopause policy. Again, something that we'll talk about later on. I would like to now welcome Dr. Tina Peers, a consultant in contraception and reproductive health and the founder of the Menopause Consultancy. Dr. Peers, the floor is yours.
Just better unmute myself. Thank you very much, Linda. It's a great pleasure to be talking to this audience, and I hope that you're going to learn a lot in the next 15 minutes. I've got, 15 minutes. Right. May I have the next slide? Here we go. So the menopause is a bit of a taboo subject. Linda's already pointed that out, even though we're talking about it a lot more than we used to, thank goodness. May I have the next slide? but it is a very life-changing event for most women. So about 80% of women will have quite debilitating symptoms, which will affect their quality of life, their concentration, their energy levels, etc., etc. And it's happening to all women who get to that stage in their lives, which is a lot of women, because life expectancy is much better than it used to be. And we're also expected then to carry on beyond the menopause for many, many years. And so what we do that preserves our health and maintains good health going forwards is very, very important. So decisions that women make at the menopause can have a huge impact on their future health in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and so on. It's very important that we don't stop living really halfway through our lives, because the quality of our life is so detrimentally affected, can be so detrimentally affected by our hormones, that we then find that, you know, that's a very big portion of our life that we're going to be postmenopausal and potentially struggling and suffering. And the majority of women are actually completely unaware of the health impact that the menopause can have on them. And there are certainly some simple measures and improvements in lifestyle that can protect them from significant health problems later in life, and in some cases from premature death. So next slide, please. So obviously there are some very important healthy options that we all need to take actually throughout our lives, not just at the menopause, but it's a good reset, isn't it, to be able to think about it and concentrate on it a bit more, and especially in our busy lives that we all seem to have. So sensible diet is very important, healthy food, unprocessed food, freshly prepared, not sort of ready meals and leftovers and things. Regular exercise, obviously terribly important. Build it into your routine if you can, so it just happens without too much effort. And moderate alcohol intake, always important, especially for women. If women have more than if a woman has regularly 2 glasses of wine a day, she is going to increase her risk of breast cancer quite markedly. So that's an adjustment that all women can make to reduce their risk of breast cancer. Being the appropriate weight is always important throughout our lives, but never more so than when you get to the menopause. And that will help reduce blood pressure increases. Exercise, being the right weight, will reduce the blood pressure, any blood pressure rises, so that's good. And good sleep routine is very important, not easy. None of us are very good at that, but there are some very important rules with sleep hygiene that we can follow. And having choosing the good healthy options will actually reduce the incidence of cardiovascular disease, osteoporosis, and breast cancer. So very, very important that we make those decisions. Can I have the next slide, please? So actually over 13 million women are over the age of 45 in the UK, which is a lot of the population, 1/5 of the population. And we are a fantastic resource, or are we going to be a huge burden to the social care bill and the NHS if we're unwell? And women's estrogen production protects them against lots of diseases. So when estrogen production goes down, those diseases unfortunately come in. Now, you men out there can feel a bit smug about this, because your testicles make testosterone the whole of your life, or they should, and 10% of it is converted to estrogen the whole of your life. And that is going to protect you against osteoporosis, against depression, against heart disease, against dementia, Parkinson's disease, bowel cancer, and will maintain your collagen, so your muscles, your joints, you're less likely to get arthritis and so on. Whereas women lose the production of estrogen halfway through their life, and unless they get HRT to supplement it, they're not going to have that protection for those diseases. So very, very important, the decisions that women make at the menopause for their future health. Right, next slide, please. Okay, so there are different types of menopause. There's a natural menopause. For most women in this country, it's about average age 51. But the symptoms of the menopause, the perimenopause, can start many years before that. So women can have perimenopausal symptoms for 5, 6, 7, 8 years before they actually have their last period. And the last period defines the start of the menopause. So you have to have not had a period for 12 months. It's a retrospective diagnosis, if you like. Early menopause is classed as 40 to 45 years, and premature menopause is under the age of 40. And unfortunately, the premature ovarian insufficiency, the premature menopause under the age of 40 has an occurrence of 1 in 100 women. Now, this is often missed, and it is a disaster when it's missed. I would encourage all of you who have daughters, nieces, next door neighbors, when you talk about any, well, not that people talk about this very much, they don't, unfortunately, but if a woman, a girl, doesn't have her period for 2 or 3 months, she needs to be investigated. It's not acceptable to have no periods for 2 or 3 months, and it should be investigated immediately. And sadly, because of the lack of diagnosis, of this diagnosis being made, many women go many years without a period, thinking that it's okay, or that there's nothing that can be done about it. And they are actually postmenopausal. And I have seen women who are 17 years old, 27 years old, 37 years old, who have had an early menopause. And of course, if they don't get the hormone replacement therapy, then they're going to go crashing into those diseases that I mentioned before, the osteoporosis, the heart disease, etc., etc. So really important that we make that diagnosis. There are various causes for that, so genetics, etc. I haven't got long enough to go into all of that now, but certainly be vigilant about women's periods. If they disappear for more than 2 or 3 months, it should be investigated. And then, of course, we've got the women who go through an artificial menopause because they've had a hysterectomy for one reason or another, with bilateral oophorectomy for cancer treatment, severe endometriosis, and polycystic ovaries, for example. Next slide, please. Okay, so the diagnosis over the age of 45, we don't do it with laboratory tests. We just go on the clinical signs, the symptoms, basically. And in the perimenopause that I spoke about, which could be several years long, women start often describing vasomotor symptoms. Irregular periods may be, not always a feature, but usually the cycle becomes shorter, and the periods become heavier and longer. So that's great joy, isn't it? So instead of being 28 days, they go to sort of 21, 23 days. And instead of being 5 days, maybe they go to 7, 8 days, 10 days, sometimes bleeding with quite a lot of heavy menstrual bleeding. And these are signs that things are starting to happen. When a woman hasn't had a period for 12 months, that's when we know that she is postmenopausal. But women can still get pregnant when they are having their periods. And it's a big mistake for women to think, surely at my age, I've had so many women over my career in contraception who have said to me in their 40s, well, I don't use any contraception because surely I can't get pregnant now. And of course, that could be their famous last words, as we find that their pregnancy test is positive. So it's very important that women should use contraception, and you should use it for a year, at least a year after your last menstrual period. If you're under the age of 50, when you have your last menstrual period, you should use contraception for 2 years, because you can suddenly ovulate. If you're over 50, use it for a year, please. So very important. If somebody is under the age of 45, then we would check their levels, maybe, just to see if they are menopausal, if they're getting symptoms and we're not quite sure where they are with their menstrual cycle, etc. Because women can have regular cycles and be perimenopausal. So if they're getting the symptoms, even if their cycle's regular and they're under 45, then we would do some blood tests. Okay, so next slide, please. So the perimenopause, as I say, increasing menstrual dysfunction often, but the continuing risk of pregnancy. Some women will get the vasomotor symptoms, but not all women will get that. And some women will say, I've sailed through it, I haven't had any symptoms whatsoever. Next slide, please. Blood loss will go up, as shown here. Heavy menstrual bleeding goes up quite considerably, from an average of 30 mils to 68.9 mils, which is quite heavy. So this is generally what we see. Next slide, please. 80% of women are affected by the menopausal symptoms, and this is by no means an exhaustive list. There could be more, symptoms than these that I've mentioned here, but hot flushes is the ones we all know about. Night sweats or feeling very hot at night. Women describe sweating, waking up with pools of sweat on their chest and under their breasts, and all their bedding is wet, and then of course they get freezing because then there's it evaporates off them and they lose their heat. So they're getting hot, so they throw their covers off, they sweat, then they get cold, they're pulling their covers on. Their poor husbands have usually moved to or partners have usually moved to another bedroom by then. So they have very poor sleep. And it's not just the hot flushes that give the poor sleep. Sometimes it's just tossing and turning and not being able to go back to sleep, and lots of wakefulness if they wake up. Depression is a big one. Now, most of the women I see in my clinic and my colleagues see, unfortunately, often go to their GP with this and are given antidepressants, and what they actually need is HRT, and the antidepressants don't work in somebody who needs hormonal replacement, so they can still feel miserable for years, and then finally some lovely friend says, why don't you go and see about your hormones, and they come and see us, and then we give them HRT and their depression goes very, very quickly. Carpal tunnel syndrome can be a problem, and that of course disturbs sleep. Then getting up in the night to pee. Some women have to get up 2 or 3 times a night, and as soon as they're given the right treatment, they can sleep through. Itchy skin is a very common one. It's called, I've forgotten what it's called. It's got a funny, it'll come to me later. Anyway, you get this feeling like ants are all over your skin, and it's got a funny name. Anyway, dry skin is often very, very common, dry hair, dry skin, and that is hormonal. Muscle weakness, fatigue, volume, loss of muscles. Now, if a woman doesn't go on HRT, she will actually lose her muscle mass at a rate of 2% per annum when she is postmenopausal. Now, that's 20% a decade, and believe you me, that is not a good look. So one doesn't want to lose one's muscles, especially, that is regardless of how hard you work in the gym. So to preserve the muscles, it's very, very important that we feed our bodies hormones. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, more symptoms: receding gums, brittle nails, low libido. And of course, this one can have a huge impact on the woman and on her partner and her relationship, because, if she suddenly feels that she is asexual, and she will mourn the loss of her sexuality and the feeling of wanting to have sex and so on. And that can be quite a big loss. So vaginal dryness is a very common feature. Usually that's a sort of later feature, not an early one, and can be very problematic. The vagina goes from being a lovely, elastic, corrugated tube, which has got plenty of elasticity in it, is moist, is full of lactobacillus that keep any bacteria and infections, fungi like thrush away, and works and is fit for purpose. And then it goes from being like that with no estrogen, it will become like a little glass test tube. So it becomes straight walled, it becomes thin walled, and non-elastic. So you try and have fun with that, and it's not fun at all. It just splits and starts to bleed and gets infections and just feels very uncomfortable and puts everybody off. Bladder irritability is a very common feature, which leads to the nocturia, they're getting up in the night to pee, but often also women get this feeling of an irritable bladder where they feel during the day like they've got infections in there, and often they haven't, but it just doesn't feel right, and that's because the bladder loves estrogen. Osteoporosis obviously is painful, and it is dangerous, and it is one of the top big killers of women. If a woman falls and fractures her hip, most women will die certainly within 6 months of that fracture. Vaginal infections are more common because the lactobacillus move out of this lovely corrugated vagina that's no good anymore. And then often women get weight gain and metabolic syndrome, and dry eyes is also complained about. Next slide, please. Sounds like fun, doesn't it, the whole thing? So reduction in collagen, changes to your appearance, aches and pains. Our joints are full of collagen, and they're constantly repairing and replacing, and that all stops at the menopause, and therefore women are more likely to get aching joints and stiffness in their joints and feel like old women as they're getting up in the morning, and more likely to get osteoarthritis. They can become, not surprisingly, with all of that going on, very irritable, and have low mood and feel flat. They can feel forgetful and walk into rooms and can't remember why they were going into that room. I mean, I know we all do that to a certain extent, but it becomes more prevalent. They can get sudden anxiety attacks. Women who are very confident and have no issues with that normally and are not of an anxious disposition can find that they can get overwhelming anxiety, which just is very frightening. Panic attacks can also happen, taking it to an extreme. That can make them lose their confidence. You know, women who are used to giving presentations and to board meetings and things like that, suddenly they don't want to do it because they feel they might have a panic attack in the middle of it. They might have a hot flush in the middle of it. How embarrassing is that, you know? Backache, sexual function loss, and 10% of women have these symptoms for more than 12 years. So it's not a great joy for many, many women. Next slide, please. So this leads to misery, very debilitating, exhaustion, both mentally and physically, detrimental to the relationships, both at home and work. They start to feel as if they've lost their femininity, their identity, their control, their faculties, some women feel, their ability to cope. Asymptomatic women, some women, 20%, won't have very many of these symptoms at all. They might have one or two, they might not have very many at all and sail through it, but they won't have any idea of the detrimental effect of their future health that going through the menopause could have for them. So they could find that they haven't had the conversation with somebody like myself about the implications of the loss of estrogen. I sometimes think it's the women who have the symptoms who are the lucky ones, because they seek help and therefore they get the information, they get the latest data on the safety of things like HRT and the improvement that can cause in our health, and therefore they're the ones who then go forward, possibly more healthy than the others. So next slide, please. The British Menopause Society did a big survey. This is just their poster. Next slide, please. And the results are on this next slide. So 45% of the women asked said that the symptoms had a very negative impact on their work lives. 51% said that it affected their sex lives negatively. 42% said they felt less sexy. 38% of their partners reported feeling helpless, didn't know how to help them. 28% report that lack of understanding leads to arguments, you can imagine, and that it had detrimental effects on their social life, with 33% going out less, 32% feeling they were bad company, and 23% feeling isolated. The next slide, please. So is there help? Well, yes, there is, thank goodness. And one option is HRT, which I've alluded to. It is very safe and effective. The modern HRTs that we use now are body identical, natural hormones, just like the body's made from yams and soya. So we use very, very natural products, and they reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease by up to 60%. That's the biggest killer for women, cardiovascular disease. And estrogen is very protective, so it reduces the risk of cardiovascular disease by up to 60%, of dementia by up to 65%, of Parkinson's disease, it prevents osteoporosis, it reduces the risk of bowel cancer by 30%, and it also maintains the collagen production, the muscle mass, the joints, etc., reduces the incidence of metabolic syndrome and diabetes, and I could go on and on and on telling you about the good things that it can do, because it's the elixir of life as far as we're concerned. So thank you very much for having me do this presentation. I think we're going to answer questions at the end, aren't we, Linda?
Yes, we are. Thank you very much. That was really informative and helpful. I learned some new things, and I'm still trying to get my head around the very long list of symptoms, some of which you mentioned. I think for me personally, night sweats have been really difficult, and the feeling of the loss of mojo, which once I had convinced my doctors I wasn't depressed, because that wasn't what I was feeling, and they gave me HRT, is most definitely back towards a level that I'm happy with, but obviously I've only just started the HRT, so it will take a bit of time.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah.
So now I'd like to introduce you to Monique King, Head of Risk Management at Julius Baer. who has kindly agreed to share her story, and also to Matt Lee, Executive Director, also at Julius Baer, who is putting the men in menopause today and sharing his story of being the partner of someone going through the menopause. Monique, if we could start with you, what has been your experience of the menopause in the workplace?
All right, thank you, Linda, and thank you, Dr. Christina Peers. For me, it was like you was actually talking about me directly, so I can relate to so many of those kind of symptoms. So my experience of menopause in the workplace actually was positive from the extent that my workplace was very supportive, but from a personal perspective, was a real shock to me. I started to experience what I would say were physical symptoms. So started with hip problems, and I was having MRI scans on my back, was seeing a rheumatologist, but nobody in the medical profession had actually mentioned to me that this could be something to do with menopause. So I went through all of this process with rheumatologists, having steroid injections in my hips, etc. But then more symptoms started. So my thumbs were hurting, and as Dr. Peers said, my joints were hurting, I was creaking, all of these different things. And I'm thinking, I'm falling apart. I didn't understand what was happening. Things like having an intolerance to food, which I'd never had before. And suddenly food types that I was eating were actually causing a reaction. My hay fever increased. Lots of different things, which again, I'd never even considered could be menopause at all. But I would say the worst thing for me was the mental symptoms that I started to experience. So I'd always seen myself as somebody who's very resilient, very sharp, on the ball, was able to multitask, juggle home life, work, everything, take on as much as possible. And suddenly I started to experience anxiety. And again, I didn't really understand what it was or where it was coming from. I have a youngish son as well, which is quite hard when you're trying to balance work, home, a husband, a young child. And I'd always been able to do that. And suddenly I felt that I was failing in multiple areas, and I couldn't remember anything. So walking into the room, as Dr. Tina Peers said, and forgetting why I'd gone into the room, or even having a conversation like now, and the words would just disappear, or I'd completely lose my train of thought. I didn't know where I was going with the conversation. That started to make me think I had dementia. And I really started to think, actually, there's something wrong with me. And this went on. And again, I didn't think it was menopause. And actually, in hindsight, I feel quite stupid for not knowing, because both my mum and my sister's on today, which is nice to have her on the call, have gone through artificial menopause due to medical problems. And again, I still didn't connect the dots. I just didn't see it. And also, I think that was my ignorance of thinking, actually, menopause is actually the wrinkly old woman that sits in the corner, because actually that is the stereotype. That's what we think of menopause, or the lady having the hot flush, or the person, that's just not coping very well and is very moody. And all of these things actually, I think, are real, but that's not just it. There's lots of other things that actually can occur during perimenopause and menopause. And I think with Dr. Peers' point, you can be going through them for 12 years. That's, I think I would have thought I was completely mad at the end of it if I hadn't realised what was actually happening to me. But what happened, I just crashed and burnt, basically. And that's how I was diagnosed with, actually, you're going through menopause. It was one morning, I'd had a particularly bad weekend, just couldn't cope anymore, and thought, I'm done, I'm out. So those suicidal thoughts for me were, the option. It's the only way I could actually continue with life or not continue with life. So I'd gone to work on the Monday morning with the option of being out. I didn't want to do this anymore, and got to the station, parked, got out of the car, and then just fell apart. And luckily, I called my husband. He's like, stay where you are, stay in the car, I'm coming. My sister called me and said, you need to get some help. I think you might be going through menopause. And I called my then line manager, who was amazing. So that for me is my point around the workplace experience was actually very positive. Once I told people what was happening, it changed. But actually going through it and not understanding what I was going through was the really scary part, because all of these things are happening to you and you think you know who you are as a person, and suddenly you become someone else and you're like, I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know how I'm supposed to respond to things. You know, how I would have responded in the past is suddenly different. So went to my GP, and as Linda mentioned and Dr. Pearce, was put on antidepressants, and actually was diagnosed with clinical depression at that point. I was given HRT, but the response to HRT wasn't quick enough. So the antidepressants did help, I've got to say. It kind of pulled me back to a point where I could start thinking about what I needed to do. So, and one of the menopause doctors I've spoken to said, in the NHS, you get such a short period of time to speak to a client, a patient, that actually sometimes giving antidepressants is the only option that we can give to that person, because it gets them through that stage and then they can think more about what's happening in their life. But I went to see a private medical professional and actually was given HRT. But I appreciate that actually in the NHS, it's not that easy. So there's a lot of women or people that are actually going through the menopause that are not getting the support they need. You know, I've been lucky, I've been able to go privately and receive that support. And coming off of the antidepressants is something I'm working towards, along with the HRT. But for me, HRT has been, you know, a gift, somebody that actually I could go and talk to and say, these are my symptoms, this is what I'm experiencing, all of these things, am I going crazy, is it really happening? And it's like, yeah, that's the menopause, and actually explaining why it happens, the drop in estrogen. And then you suddenly realize, okay, I can understand, I can deal with this, which is at the stage I'm at now.
Thank you very much, Monique, and thanks for being so open and honest about your story. What did your employer do to support you during this time?
So, like you say, once I spoke about what was happening, my line manager was fantastic. And actually, as an organisation, they listened, and I was asked to try a menopause benefit, which was new, but it was, for me, a clear indication that the employer wanted to help, but actually just didn't know what to do. And actually, I couldn't say what I needed because I didn't know what I needed at that point. So I think the awareness and the education is so important. And luckily, my employer has been very supportive of that, and actually, you know, put steps in place to help people going through the menopause. But I think it is a journey. I think there's more for us to do, particularly with private medical insurance. So I think a lot of corporates, organisations provide medical insurance for their employees and think that would cover them. But actually what I realised, and actually lots of other women I'm speaking to, we're not covered under the private medical insurance that the standard corporates are supplying. So actually you end up being treated for all different things other than menopause. So actually, I think as part of our pledge and the work streams objectives to actually try and challenge our, you know, private medical insurers and actually understand why we're in a position that actually they're not covering menopause. Because if you think if a corporate was able to change that, and actually we had women that were actually seen by a private medical professional in the menopause, given HRT, you then don't go off to the rheumatologist and to the mental health practitioner and all of these other areas that you need support for if you were just treated for the underlying symptom in the first place. So that for me is what we kind of need to change. One thing I'd say for employers to be aware of, I actually changed roles at the same time as going through menopause. And whilst that's a great thing, and really excited about the opportunity, I found that transition so hard because I was suffering with anxiety. I started to have that imposter syndrome. What am I doing? I can't cope with this. So I think it's something employees need to be aware of, not just for people going through menopause, but actually something that's happening in somebody's life, actually considering the whole person and the time of the move or the time of, a big change happening in the workplace. But for me, Julius Baer's been phenomenal. We've been supporting, menopause webinars, been talking about it. We've had employees writing blogs on it. And I think that really leads me nicely to introduce Matt, who is a colleague of mine, and I've recruited onto the DP workstream. And actually, Matt is also a mental health first aider. And I think that really makes a difference in terms of that understanding and that listening ear. So, Matt, over to you.
Thanks, Monique. What an amazing story that is. So Monique basically press ganged me / invited me to become a member of the work stream a couple of months ago. So that's where my journey about the whole menopause started, although it probably started a couple of years ago with my partner Claire, who's perimenopausal. This is a new term that I learned a couple of months ago. So she suffers mainly from hot sweats and memory loss. But the whole process has been a voyage of discovery. But as Monique suggested there, I quickly discovered like the huge overlaps with the mental health side, and being sort of trained as a mental health first aider and having experience of doing that. There's a lot around that. My passion for mental health started with my two daughters who are now adults, 19 and 21. Hello, Sophie and Izzy. And they live with OCD and anxiety. They're 19 and 21. So that was the main reason that I got involved in mental health. And as Monique said there, I think it's a journey that I've enjoyed. I think there's a lot of overlaps. I think that our generation and our parents' generation is very much in the dark over a lot of it. And in terms of mental health, that is, whereas my daughter's generation is so open about it, they just talk about it as if it's the norm. But I do think whilst we're a lot better now, I think we're definitely lagging on the menopause side of things. It's just as a couple of you already suggested, there's a taboo subject around it all, really. But there's two aspects I want to talk about today based on my personal experience. So first, being a man working with colleagues who are dealing with menopause, and secondly, as a partner, as I've already said, in a relationship with someone in the same boat. It's also worth noting from a sort of mental health perspective about, during the period when women are going through the menopause, to whatever extent, men are also going through their own mental health, heightened levels, should we say, of stress, etc. And it's a very potent combination, really. So firstly, on the work front, I'm relatively senior position at a bank. I'm a relationship manager at Julius Baer, so I deal daily with people of all ages at different stages of their careers, often as a line report, and those dealing with menopause tend to occupy the more senior roles, as I think Linda suggested earlier. So I can totally understand the challenges of menopause for those people. I think it's fair to say most men don't talk about it. I was really interested when talking about Monique and Linda and the others on the work stream that a lot of women don't talk about it, but men certainly don't talk about it. And I've got quite a lot of stick for telling my friends and colleagues that I'm on this work stream, but hey ho, I can handle that. I just think most blokes are scared of putting their foot in it. I think there's some simple rules of thumb about being open, being available for discussion, providing a safe space, just being a genuine human being, really. But a lot of people can't deal with that, and certainly not being judgmental about stuff. But it's, you know, I just think I think we do have, as Monique suggested there, I think we do have resources at our disposal. I think we're lucky at Julius Baer, and I think we're lucky on a relative basis in the financial industry, where we do have a lot of employee assistance relative to a lot of other industries that friends are in, you know. So that's pretty good. I also think we should have menopause training. So we had mental health training for all of the front-facing staff at Julius Baer, which is industry leading, really, but that was fantastic. And I just think it would be great to do the menopause side as well. As I said, I think, you know, 10 years or so ago, mental health was at the stage that we are with menopause now, I think, and it'd be great to make it just part of everyday sort of dialogue, really. Second part of the chat today really is the sort of home life, because, you know, home and work are very much interchangeable, particularly now with obviously home working. But, you know, I've already mentioned my partner Claire, and hello Claire, I know you're listening. She's perimenopausal. She's delighted I've taken on the role because it allows me to understand more of what she's going through. But I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people, as Monique suggested, you know, where the partner might not fully understand, certainly in those early stages, until there's maybe diagnosis or whatever, exactly where they are. And it's very true to say that for men, I think there's a hackneyed stigma around a lot of things relating to certainly menopause, but women generally. You know, it starts as an early, you know, as a boy, where you know, any difference that a woman or girl shows or a lady shows is referred to as, you know, the time of the month, and then it kicks in and people talk about, you know, the menopause, and, you know, that's the reason for everything, really. And I just think, you know, that openness, that discussion, that non-judgmental conversation, it's really going to help, because I just think you've got this really potent combination, as, you know, Dr. Piers there suggested, about all those issues around the menopause, you know, all those physical limitations, shall we say, or different issues that we've got there. And you've got men going through their own issues as well, the kind of midlife crisis, whatever you call it, but certainly heightened levels of mental health concerns, really. You put that all together, and if you're not willing to talk about it openly, I just think you've got a recipe for disaster, really. And I think it's probably why a lot of relationships end, you know, in that kind of 40s and 50s, because of that lack of communication, really. So and just sort of moving on from that, I mean, I've been thinking for ages, but particularly since I've been on the work stream, about how to ask somebody who's going through menopause about it. And, you know, as a man, I often put my foot in it. I said to Monique right at the outset when she invited me in, you know, I apologies at the outset for anything that I say that's sort of too cumbersome and sticking my size 12s in. But on a recent webinar, I posed that question on there, and most of the participants came back and said, "That's great, Matt. You know, it's great that you're asking." Interestingly, 3 women came back there and said that a man should never ask the question. So I'm fully appreciative of that, and I guess I'd be really interested to hear your views on all of this, you know, panelists and participants alike, because, you know, I think if we're really going to embrace menopause the way we are mental health, and it becomes the norm rather than taboo, everybody needs to feel comfortable about it. So, you know, as women, as people with menopause, how should a man engage in discussion about it? Back to you, ladies.
Thank you, Matt, for that. Monique, I'm really glad that obviously you're feeling much better, having told us your story. And Matt, thank you for bucking the trend and getting involved. And it can't be easy. So let's ask the audience if you could all get onto the chat and the Q&A and answer Matt's question in terms of how would you feel comfortable being asked about the menopause. And whilst you're putting in your answers, if I go to Dr. Tina Piers, have you got an answer? And then Monique, I'll ask you as well.
So it's a very difficult one, isn't it? I think it's going to depend on the relationship. And I think the earlier that the conversation starts, the better. So keeping those lines of communication open, and also hopefully trying to have a bit of a laugh about it. You know, if you can find some humor in it together, then it's easier to talk about somehow, I think, and it doesn't feel then, if the you know, your partner's saying something, oh, you're just behaving, you know, you're becoming very moody or something, it feels like a big criticism. Whereas if you can make a joke about it and pull their leg about it and talk about it when you're not feeling moody, then that might be helpful. But yeah.
Thank you. Monique?
I think ultimately the DP's objectives is to have an inclusive environment, specific industries, but I think as human beings we need to be inclusive. And I think from my point of view, saying that a man shouldn't ask a female if they're going through menopause, actually I think as individuals we should be opening enough with each other and be, of course, be respectful and understanding, empathetic, but actually to be able to ask that question in a way that you can support an individual is the right thing. I would rather somebody ask me, because actually somebody might not realise they're going through menopause. So then having somebody that just says to them, are you okay? These symptoms, or I've seen this before, could actually open that door for somebody, to make them think, actually, it could be that. So I think it's done in a respectful, positive way. I would be very open to someone asking.
Thank you. Having looked at the chat and the Q&A, there's quite a lot of different answers. Quite a lot of people are open and said they'd be happy to discuss, whilst others are not quite so open. So I think it just shows that everyone's got a unique menopause experience, and to be mindful of that, really. But at the end of the day, if you see someone struggling, be human about it and ask how they're doing, or if there's anything you can help with, and then start that dialogue that way, I suppose. Okay, so having looked at the Q&A, I think if we just take some more questions. Dr. Tina, I see that you've already been very busy on the chat. Could you maybe take some of the main questions about HRT? There's a few in there, not specific to people's personal situations, but quite a few questions around HRT on the chat.
I think that it's very important to go and see your GP and start the discussion if you can. Now, if you see a GP and the GP says, no, you're too young, or doesn't seem to entertain it as an option, then try and see a different partner in the practice, because they will often take a different view. So try and shop around a little bit. But I think it's important for people to realize you don't need to have a referral to see a specialist if you see a specialist privately. Unfortunately, that's not the case if you see somebody on the NHS. And there aren't a huge number of menopause clinics in the country on the NHS, but there are a few. And so, yes, you may be able to get your GP to refer you, or just book yourself in with a specialist. A lot of women will spend quite a considerable amount of money having their hair dyed and coloured and cut and so on, and maybe it's worth an investment for them to spend the same amount on seeing a consultant specialist, or a specialist who can set them on the right track at least and give them the right information. Often we always write to the GPs once we've seen somebody, with the patient's permission obviously, and make our recommendations, having started the patient on that sort of road, giving them a prescription to start them off. And most of the GPs, 99% of them, will take over that prescription and will then start providing it on the NHS, which is really helpful. But they won't give certain things. Most of them won't give testosterone, for example, but if we give it, they won't give a repeat prescription for it. Some will. A few now are starting to, but they'll be happy to prescribe almost anything apart from testosterone if the specialist sees that person at least once a year and gives the direction. So one of the things that might happen is the GPs start pushing for people to come off the HRT at some point. And that there is no science for that whatsoever. There's no data to show that it's a good idea to come off it. In fact, there's the opposite. The data shows that women who go on it and stay on it for the rest of their lives, are much fitter and much healthier, have much more fun. They travel more, they do more exercise because they're fitter. And therefore we don't recommend anyone should come off it unless this is another reason that's, you know, unforeseen. But the GPs will start often pushing at 5 years or 10 years for a woman to start coming off it. But if you see a specialist once a year at least, then they will get a letter saying, I endorse this patient being on this and continuing on this, and that gives you, you know, it's really good. Yeah, it's really good. Yeah.
One thing I would add, I've seen on the chat a few people asking, and it seems like they're at the beginning of their journey with this, is it took me 6 years, that's 6 years, it felt like 6 years, 6 months going to my GP frequently saying, look, things aren't right, I need help. And, you know, they kept saying, you're depressed. No, I'm not. I feel achy. I had so many of the long list of menopause symptoms. And luckily a friend of mine, you know, suggested, why don't you ask them if this is it? And so once I said no, I don't want antidepressants. I'd like to see what's actually really wrong with me. I then had to go for lots of blood tests. I was definitely a pincushion for quite a while, and then suddenly even though my values were still within ranges, they started taking me a bit more seriously. I think it's just really hard if you're having a hard time, you're not used to going to the doctor, you're used to, you know, doing well at your job, everything else, to then kind of be fobbed off in a way. And you just have to stand your ground, take your nice guidelines in with you, and just say, no, okay, I'm not feeling right. Ask to see a different doctor if need be, and just keep persisting, because you ultimately know yourself the best.
I think you're right, Linda. And I think if women know what to expect at the menopause and what can be menopausal, then they can go armed with that information. So they're not looking to the doctor to give the answers, but they're actually going and saying, I think that I have become perimenopausal, therefore I would like to explore HRT, I would like to do that. You know, there are various private menopause clinics across country. I've got one in Surrey, the Menopause Consultancy we're called, and people can book online. But the good thing about it is that at the moment, because of COVID, everything is online. So we do everything by Zoom. So actually we find now that we have patients from all over the country. Somebody early on in the chat put they're in Scotland and they said you can't get natural progesterone up there. But actually, if you saw somebody in a clinic in England like me or like my colleagues, then we would do a prescription online, and they would post you the Utrogestan. So it wouldn't be a barrier, the fact that you live in Scotland. And there are ways around things. You know, at the moment, there seems to be a deficiency of estrogel in the NHS pharmacies, but the private pharmacies have got it, and it's not expensive. It's £9 a can, you know. So there are ways around it if you can be creative to make sure that women get what they need, the advice and the help and the support, and then the medication, you know, the HRT, good HRT. Yeah.
Thank you. So I'll just just looking at the time, I'll do a quick update on what we've got planned and then wrap up before I hand over to Helena Morrissey, the chair of the Diversity Project. We've put together a calendar of menopause related topics, which we'll be sharing in the chat function now. And we will open registration soon. We have topics ranging from mental health and the menopause to line manager training, and lots more in between. And we'll be hosting some of these webinars also with other work streams from the Diversity Project, such as the mental health and others. We're working on a role model campaign in Q2, which is just around the corner, and welcome everyone to take part. If you'd like to, please email us on info@diversityproject.com to get involved, and let's help break the taboo. And we'll also be launching a menopause resource area on the Diversity Project website shortly. You will have seen that we intend to launch a Diversity Project Menopause Pledge ready for World Menopause Day later on this year. And this is something we'll be asking our member firms to sign up to. and it will be made available to other companies within the industry if they wish to use it maybe as a best practice document. And so lastly, to wrap up, we think that menopause is an opportunity for our industry. It is one way that firms can show they are serious about gender equality in the workplace. Over to you, Helena.
Thank you so much, Linda, and thank you to all of the fabulous panelists in that session. I, as someone who went through the menopause just as we went into the first lockdown of the pandemic and struggled with so much change in our lives, a lot of it resonated great with me, and I noted that it was the most popular of our 3 events today, so there is clearly a need for us to address this area. I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who's attended or helped to organise one of the events today. It is in the context of being our, as I started by saying in the first panel, first ever solo Diversity Project International Women's Day event, much more targeted around women in the fund management and savings industry than any of the sort of collaborative work that we've done before, which were great, but very general. We are on a mission here to really transform the talent in our industry and to make sure that obviously we achieve gender balance, that we attract more diverse women, that we attract people of different, come from underrepresented groups, whether that's ethnic backgrounds, neurodiversity, disability, etc. So we are on a very intensive schedule as things stand, and afterwards we are going to send you a link. So if you missed any of the other events and want to listen to the one on male allyship and on inspiring career stories in the fund management industry, then you will receive that, along with a guide on inclusive cultures for CEOs, a male allyship toolkit. We did have some requests for the slides for today's menopause panel, so I'm going to look at Linda and ask if that can be attached. And finally, just to conclude, our announced today future female fund manager program, which means that we are not going to rest easy until we have finally improved the gender balance in that important area of our industry, the fund management community. So again, thank you to everybody. Thank you to Adriana Weber, Caroline Golston, and Lucy Owen for all of the work behind the scenes. And thank you again so much for joining us. Happy International Women's Day. Thank you for helping us break the bias. Bye-bye.